The night I found out my wife was sleeping with my coworker, I was standing in my own kitchen holding a casserole dish I'd spent an hour making. I remember that detail because it feels so stupid now. I'd gotten off my shift early, stopped at the store, picked up the ingredients she'd written on the notepad by the fridge, the one that said we need to talk more, just us at the bottom in her handwriting, which I'd been carrying around in my wallet like some kind of reminder to be a better husband. I made the casserole. I even lit the candle on the table. And then I heard her laughing from upstairs. Not the kind of laugh you make when you're watching something on your phone. The other kind. I set the dish down on the counter and stood there for a long moment. The candle was flickering. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary. I can't eat either of those things anymore without feeling sick. His name was Ryan. He was the chef supervisor at the distribution center where I'd worked for 11 years. I'd trained under him when I was 29. I'd covered for him twice when he came in late. When his father died 3 years ago, I drove 2 hours to attend the funeral because he said it would mean a lot. I didn't go upstairs that night. I put plastic wrap over the casserole dish, blew out the candle, went and sat in my truck in the driveway, and called my older brother Gary. Gary didn't say much. He mostly just listened. When I finished talking, he said, "You need to know exactly what you're dealing with before you do anything." That was it. That was all he said. At the time, I thought he was just being calm for my sake. I didn't understand yet that he was right. My wife's name is Vanessa. We met when we were both 24 at a 4th of July cookout that neither of us wanted to be at. She was funny in a dry, quiet way that took me a while to pick up on. She made fun of the host's playlist for 15 minutes straight without ever smiling, and I was gone. We dated for 2 years and got married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Ohio. For a long time, things were good. Not spectacular, we weren't that kind of couple, but solid. We had routines. She liked to read on Sunday mornings. I coached youth baseball on Saturday afternoons. We had a dog named Biscuit who died when he was 12, and who we both cried over for longer than either of us ever admitted out loud. We talked about kids sometimes, but never quite committed. We said next year for about 6 years running. The cracks started showing when I switched to the night shift. I didn't want to, but the pay bump was real, and we had the mortgage and the truck payment, and Vanessa had started a small business out of the house. A custom stationery operation she ran on Etsy. That wasn't breaking even yet. It made sense on paper. I'd be home while she was working, then she'd sleep while I worked. We'd overlap on weekends. In practice, we stopped overlapping at all. I'd come home at 6 in the morning, and she'd already be up and at her desk. I'd sleep until 2, eat, and start getting ready for work again by 8. We'd share maybe 90 minutes together on a good day. Dinner was usually something I ate alone out of a container. I stopped knowing what she was doing with her evenings. I know now, of course. Ryan had started at the plant about a year before I switched shifts. He was charming in the way that certain men are, all easy smiles and the right questions. The kind of guy who makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I liked him. Most people did. He was good at his job and better at reading people. He figured out pretty fast that Vanessa was lonely. I think he figured it out before I did. She introduced herself to him at the company picnic in June. By September, according to the phone records I eventually pulled, they were talking every day. I didn't know any of that the night I sat in the driveway. I only knew what I'd heard. I didn't confront her. Not that night. I went back inside after about an hour. I could hear the shower running. I changed into pajamas, got into bed, and lay there in the dark listening to her come out of the bathroom and walk down the hall toward our room. She pushed the door open, saw me, and said, "Oh, I didn't hear you come in." "Got off early," I said. "Made dinner. It's on the counter if you're hungry." She said she'd already eaten. She didn't ask why I was home early. She got into bed, scrolled through her phone for 20 minutes, and went to sleep. I stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off. At work the next morning, I watched Ryan walk the floor and smiled back at him when he smiled at me and counted the hours until I could leave. Over the next 3 weeks, I was very careful. I talked to Gary again. He connected me with a friend of his, a woman named Phyllis, a family attorney, and I sat in her office on a Tuesday afternoon and told her everything I knew and everything I suspected. She asked me questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. She told me to get a separate bank account. She told me to document everything. She told me to find out specifically how our assets were structured before I did anything else. That last part mattered more than I could have imagined. 4 years earlier, my Uncle Raymond, my dad's older brother, a quiet man who'd spent 40 years working in insurance and never spent a dime he didn't have to, died without any children of his own and left his estate to be divided among his nephews and nieces. My share came out to a little over $400,000. Vanessa knew about the inheritance. What she didn't know, because I'd had a bad feeling I couldn't quite name at the time and hadn't said anything, was exactly how much it was or where it was held. I put it in a separate investment account in my name only, and just never gotten around to bringing it up. I told her it was some money from Raymond, and she'd nodded and gone back to whatever she was reading, and that was the end of it. Phyllis got very quiet when I told her that account, she said carefully. If it was opened before the marriage and kept entirely separate, never commingled, never used for joint expenses, it may not be marital property. I hadn't commingled it. I hadn't touched it at all. It had just been sitting there accumulating interest for 4 years because I didn't know what to do with it. Get me the account documents, Phyllis said, and don't do anything else yet. I had confirmation by the end of October. 2 weeks of watching my own house like a stranger peering through a window. I asked a former coworker who'd gone into private investigation, a guy I knew from high school named Dale, to do some basic documentation for me. Nothing elaborate. Just enough. He had photos within 4 days. I sat in Dale's car in a parking lot on a Wednesday evening and looked at them for about 30 seconds before I handed them back. You want copies? Dale asked. I'll need them eventually, I said. I drove to Phyllis's office the next morning. She was ready. Everything she'd needed from me was already filed. The inheritance account, she confirmed, was legally separate. Vanessa's attorney, whoever she eventually hired, could contest it, but Phyllis was confident. So what are your goals here? Phyllis asked. She had a way of asking questions like that, flat and direct, like she was reading from a form. It helped, actually. It kept me from getting sentimental. I thought about it for a moment. The house, I said. I want the house. I've put 9 years of work into that place. She wrote something down. What else? I want her to have to say it, out loud, in writing. Not to me, to everyone. Phyllis looked up from her notepad. Say what exactly? She asked. That it was her fault. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I can work with that. I filed for divorce on a Friday in November. Vanessa found out when she was served at our house by a process server while I was at work. She called me 11 times between 10 a.m. and noon. I let them all go to voicemail and listened to them on my lunch break. The first 3 were confused. The middle ones were angry. The last 2 were crying. I called her back after the last one. She said, Why didn't you just talk to me? I said, I'm talking to you now. She said that wasn't what she meant. I told her I knew. She hired an attorney named Cliff, who called Phyllis within the week. Vanessa had apparently decided she wanted the house and half of whatever she could get, which, at that point she believed, included the inheritance because I'd never told her what it was worth. Cliff's opening number was aggressive. Phyllis let him finish and then sent back a very short response. I wasn't there for that exchange, but Phyllis told me about it later. She said Cliff called back within 2 hours. His tone had changed considerably. The negotiation took about 3 weeks. I didn't attend most of it. Phyllis kept me updated. Vanessa was willing to give up the house as she got enough in liquid assets. But liquid assets, once she removed the inheritance account from the calculation, were significantly less than she'd anticipated. Her choices were to fight a long legal battle over the inheritance, which she might or might not win, or take what was on the table and sign something she wouldn't enjoy signing. I asked Phyllis to add one term to the settlement agreement. A single paragraph, an acknowledgement in Vanessa's own words that the marriage had ended due to her infidelity, that she had engaged in an extramarital relationship, that I bore no responsibility for the failure of the marriage. She won't like that, Phyllis said. I know. It has no legal standing. It won't affect anything materially. I know that too. Phyllis looked at me for a moment. Your call, she said. They pushed back on the paragraph for 2 weeks. Vanessa apparently told Cliff she'd rather keep fighting. Then Cliff did the math on the inheritance dispute, the legal fees, the uncertainty, the timeline, and had a frank conversation with his client. She signed on a Thursday afternoon in December. I was in the conference room. So was Ryan, which I hadn't expected. He sat beside her like some kind of moral support, arms crossed, smirking at the table in a way that was clearly designed to bother me. It didn't bother me, not the way he expected. I watched Vanessa sign the paper. I watched her slide it across the table. I picked it up, read the paragraph one more time, folded it in half, and put it in my jacket pocket. Ryan said something then. Something about how I'd better enjoy that house because it was the only thing I'd be coming home to. I don't remember exactly. It was the kind of thing men say when they want you to react. I looked at him for a second. Then I looked at Vanessa. "Thank you for signing," I said to her. That was all. We were done in 20 minutes. Vanessa's mother had been calling me for weeks. She'd left 3 voicemails, all variations of the same thing, that I needed to understand Vanessa's side, that marriages are complicated, that she hoped we could still be civil. I hadn't called back. Her parents hosted a birthday dinner for Vanessa's father every year in January, same restaurant, same group of people. Her parents, her 2 sisters and their husbands, a few family friends who'd been around since Vanessa was a kid. I'd been going for 9 years. Her father, Pete, was a retired electrician who never had much to say but always shook my hand like he meant it. I showed up to that dinner. I wasn't invited, but nobody had told me I wasn't. Vanessa was already there when I walked in. So was Ryan. He'd apparently decided he was at the stage of the relationship where you bring him to family dinners. Her mother saw me first. She started to stand up from her chair and then didn't, caught somewhere between greeting me and asking me to leave. Vanessa's face went white. Ryan's went red. Pete just washed. I said hello to everyone at the table. I shook Pete's hand. I told him happy birthday. Then I reached into my jacket and set a folded piece of paper on the table in front of him. "I just thought," I said, "that you should know what actually happened." It was a copy of the paragraph from the settlement agreement, 6 sentences. In Vanessa's handwriting, well, her signature, her acknowledgement, her words that her attorney had drafted and she'd agreed to and signed. I told Pete I was sorry to interrupt his birthday. I meant it. He was a decent man who deserved a straight answer, and his daughter had been telling people a version of events that did not match the signed legal document now sitting on the table in front of him. I left without ordering anything. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 10 minutes. I wasn't sure how I felt. Lighter, maybe. Like I'd put something down I'd been carrying for longer than I realized. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Pete. It said, "I'm sorry, son. I didn't know." I stared at that for a long time. The next 6 months were quiet in the way that empty houses are quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. I worked my shifts. I came home. I fixed things. There was a section of flooring in the hallway I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years, and I finally did it, and then I just kept going. The bathroom tile, the back porch railing, the kitchen cabinets. I worked on the house the way some men drink, methodically and alone, until I was too tired to think. Gary drove down once a month to help. He never talked about Vanessa unless I brought her up. He'd just show up with coffee and ask what we were doing today. I didn't date. I wasn't ready. I knew that about myself and I didn't fight it. About 8 months after the divorce was finalized, I was doing a supply run at the hardware store on a Saturday morning when I ran into a woman named Carolyn. I didn't know her. She was standing in the lumber aisle holding 2 different stain samples up to the light, squinting at them. "That one," I said, pointing to the darker one, without really thinking about it. "It'll look lighter once it dries." She looked at me. She had paint on her left forearm and sawdust in her hair, and she was clearly not interested in being spoken to by a stranger. "How do you know?" she said. "Made that mistake twice," I said. "Both times on a porch." She looked at me for another second. Then she looked back at the samples. She put the lighter one back on the shelf. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I got my sandpaper and left. I thought about her for 2 days for reasons I couldn't entirely explain. I saw her again 3 weeks later. Same hardware store. She was in the paint section, and she had a different kid with her this time. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, who was systematically pulling every paint chip off the lowest rack and organizing them into what appeared to be a very deliberate color gradient on the floor. The woman, Carolyn, was on the phone, turned away, speaking in the low, urgent voice of someone who is professionally very patient but is currently at her limit. The girl looked up at me from her color arrangement. She held up a chip. "Is this cerulean or cobalt?" she said. I looked at it. "Closer to cerulean," I said. "Cobalt's got more green." She considered this seriously. Then she placed it in the correct spot in her gradient and went back to work. Carolyn got off the phone. She turned around and saw me standing there talking to her daughter, and for 1 second I could see the calculation happen on her face. Who is this person, and should I be concerned? And then she must have decided something, because the look passed. "She's helping," I said. "She's always helping," Carolyn said, "whether anyone asks or not." The girl looked up. "I'm Sophie," she said. "I'm 8. "I'm Marcus," I said, and then immediately realized Marcus was the name I was not supposed to use. "I mean Nathan." "Nathan." Sophie stared at me. "Which one is it?" "Nathan," I said. Sorry, long week. Carolyn almost smiled at that. Her name, she told me, was Carolyn. She was refinishing her back porch, the same project I'd apparently rendered an opinion on 3 weeks earlier, and her ex-husband was supposed to be helping this weekend and had canceled, and she was already behind, and Sophie had insisted on coming to the hardware store because she considered herself an essential consultant. She's right, I said. Cerulean and cobalt are genuinely different. This time Carolyn did smile. It was small and a little reluctant, but it was real. We didn't exchange numbers that day, but Gary knew someone who knew someone, the way things work in small cities, and about 6 weeks later he mentioned offhandedly that he'd run into a friend of Carolyn's, and mentioned my name, and apparently Carolyn had said she wouldn't mind if I reached out. Gary had her number. He'd had it for 2 weeks apparently, and had been waiting for the right moment to mention it, which tells you everything you need to know about my brother. I called her on a Sunday evening. We talked for an hour and a half. She was funny, drier than I expected, quick in a way that felt practiced, like someone who'd gotten very good at keeping things light as a form of protection. I recognized that. I'd been doing the same thing. She'd been divorced for 3 years. Her ex, she said carefully, made choices that made staying impossible. I didn't push. She didn't push me either. We just talked around the edges of our respective disasters like two people sharing a narrow path, careful not to crowd each other. Sophie, I learned, was 8 and extremely opinionated about color, breakfast foods, and the proper way to load a dishwasher. She had a stuffed armadillo she'd named Gerald who attended important events. She had recently decided that she wanted to be either a marine biologist or a professional paint chip organizer. Both seem viable, I said. That's exactly what I told her, Carolyn said. We went to dinner the following Friday. Just the two of us, a place that had good fish and mediocre lighting and tables far enough apart that you could have a real conversation. We talked about everything except what had hurt us. At the end of the night she said, I haven't laughed this much in a long time, and I understood exactly what she meant. The second date, Sophie came. That was Carolyn's decision, and I respected it. She wasn't going to get attached to someone Sophie hadn't met. Sophie arrived with Gerald the armadillo and a very specific request for a restaurant that served breakfast food at dinner time. We found one. Sophie ate an enormous stack of pancakes and informed me that I had a trustworthy face, which she said was rare. How do you know? I asked. Gerald thinks so too, she said, very matter of fact, and set him on the table facing me. I looked at Gerald. Gerald appeared to be reserving judgment. It was a Saturday afternoon, maybe 4 months after Carolyn and I had started seeing each other, when her ex-husband showed up. His name was Wade. I'd heard enough about him to know that made choices that made staying impossible was doing a lot of heavy lifting. He had a restraining order against him that had expired 6 months prior. He'd been compliant since then, calling at the agreed times, showing up for his scheduled visits, behaving according to the letter of the agreement if not its spirit. I was at Carolyn's house helping her install new closet shelving when we heard his car pull up. Carolyn went still. The way she went still told me everything. Sophie was upstairs. That was the first thing I thought about. Wade knocked. Then knocked harder. Then started talking through the door in a voice that was too loud for conversation and not quite loud enough to be shouting. The specific register of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. I called Gary from the kitchen. I said, I need you to call the non-emergency line and have a patrol car come by Carolyn's address. I gave him the address. Gary didn't ask questions. He just said, on it. I went to the door. I'm not a large man. I'm not small either. 11 years of warehouse work will put some muscle on a frame. But I want to be honest, I was scared. Not of Wade specifically, but of the situation, of how fast things can change, of Sophie upstairs who still had Gerald the armadillo and a whole life ahead of her and didn't deserve any of this. I opened the door. Wade was about my height, softer, with the particular restless energy of someone who'd been working himself up in the car before he knocked. He looked at me like I was an inconvenience. Who are you? He said. I'm a friend of Carolyn's, I said. She's not available right now. I want to see Sophie. It's not a scheduled visit day, I said. You know that. He said some things after that. I'm not going to repeat them. They were the things men say when they want to establish that they are not afraid of you, which generally means they are. I stood in the doorway and I didn't raise my voice and I didn't move and I kept thinking about Sophie upstairs and I waited. The patrol car arrived 11 minutes later. I know because I counted. Wade left without incident. 2 officers make a convincing argument for de-escalation, and then Carolyn and I sat on the back porch for a long time without saying much. Sophie came down eventually and asked if we were done with the shelves yet. which was such an impossibly normal question that we both laughed. Almost, I said. I just need about 30 more minutes. Okay, Sophie said, and went back inside. Carolyn looked at me. You didn't have to do that, she said. I was already here, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Nathan. Yeah. Thank you. I ran into Ryan about a year after the divorce. I was at a gas station on the edge of town. He was at the pump across from me, driving a car I didn't recognize. He saw me and did the thing people do when they're trying to decide whether to acknowledge you or pretend they didn't see you. He went with the nod. Just the chin lift, nothing attached to it. I nodded back. I finished filling my tank. I got in my truck. That was it. That was the big confrontation I'd spent months half expecting. Two guys at a gas station nodding at each other across a row of pumps. I drove away and didn't think about it again until right now, typing this out. About 8 months after the gas station, Vanessa called me. I almost didn't answer. I stared at the name on my phone for long enough that it almost went to voicemail, and then something, curiosity probably, or maybe just the knowledge that I'd have to think about it more if I didn't answer, made me pick up. She'd left Ryan. Or he'd left her. The telling of it was vague enough that I suspected the truth was somewhere in the middle and that neither version reflected well on either of them. She was living in an apartment on the other side of the city. The Etsy business had stalled. She said she'd been thinking about reaching out for a while. She said, I made mistakes. I said, yeah. Long silence. She said she missed what we had. That she didn't understand, at the time, what she'd been throwing away. That she'd thought she was choosing something better and she'd been wrong. She said she knew she didn't have any right to expect anything from me, but she'd wanted me to know. I let her finish. I sat with it for a moment. Out the kitchen window I could see the yard, which I'd finally finished landscaping the previous fall. Beyond the fence I could see the top of the slide at the little park 2 streets over. The one Sophie called her park now. The one where she'd taught me the specific rules of the particular version of tag she'd invented, which involved Gerald as a neutral safe zone if you were holding him. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I mean it. I hope you're okay. She asked if there was any chance. No, I said, not unkindly, just directly. She said okay. We said goodbye. I hung up and stood at the window for a minute. Then I heard the front door open and Sophie's voice calling from the entry hall. Nathan, we got ice cream. Carolyn says you have to come pick a flavor before she eats all the cookie dough. I put my phone in my pocket and went to pick a flavor. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of it. Usually I don't have a clean answer. But if I'm being honest, the thing I keep coming back to is what Gary said the first night in a driveway. Know what you're dealing with before you do anything. I thought he meant know who she was, what she'd done. And that was part of it. But what he actually meant, I understand now, was know what you have, know what's yours, know what you're willing to lose and what you're not, and be clear with yourself before anyone else has a chance to tell you what the answer is. The house is still mine. I put new floors in the hallway. The back porch finally looks the way I always wanted it to. Sophie has claimed the corner of the yard by the old maple tree as her research station, and there is currently a very official-looking wooden sign there that she painted herself, which reads, Dr. Soapitz Lab, no woads walled. She added that last part herself. I didn't ask her to. I didn't think I was looking for a family when I walked into that hardware store. I didn't even think I was ready. But you don't always get to choose the timing. Sometimes you're just standing in the lumber aisle and someone needs a second opinion on a stain color and the rest of it follows from there. That's the whole story. Or at least the part worth telling. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually went wrong. Not just with Vanessa, not just with Ryan, but with me, with the version of me that existed before all of it. And I think the honest answer is that I stopped paying attention, not to the signs, not to the distance growing between us, though those too, but to myself, to what I actually had, what I'd actually built, what was genuinely mine versus what I just assumed would always be there. That's the thing about a slow unraveling. It doesn't announce itself. It just happens in the margins, in the 90 minutes you don't spend together, and the conversations you keep pushing to the weekend, in the inheritance account you never quite get around to mentioning because there's always something else to deal with first. And then, one day you're standing in your own kitchen with a casserole dish and a lit candle, and the sound of someone else's laugh coming from upstairs, and you realize the margin ran out. I don't think people who do what Vanessa did are monsters. I think they're people who made choices and then kept making them, each one a little easier than the last, until the sum of all those choices became who they were. That's not a tragedy. That's just how it works. Every decision you make is also a decision about the kind of person you're becoming. Vanessa made hers. Ryan made his. The consequences that followed weren't punishment, they were just the natural end of the road those choices built. What I'm more interested in, looking back, is what I did right. And I don't mean the legal maneuvering, the inheritance account, the paragraph in the settlement agreement, though all of that mattered. I mean the quieter things. I mean Gary, who told me to know what I was dealing with before I did anything, and who showed up every month with coffee and didn't make me talk until I was ready. I mean Phyllis, who asked flat, direct questions and helped me think clearly when I was incapable of thinking clearly on my own. I mean the hours I put into that house, not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, but because doing the work in front of me was the only way I knew how to keep moving forward. And I mean Sophie, who asked me if I was a good guy within 30 seconds of meeting me, with absolute sincerity, the way only an 8-year-old can. I've thought about that question more than I've thought about almost anything Vanessa ever said to me. Because it's the right question. It's the only question, really. Not, did you win? Not, did you get what you deserved? Not, did they get what they had coming? Just, are you a good guy? Are you the kind of person who stands in a doorway when it matters? Are you the kind of person who shows up with coffee? Are you the kind of person who knows a cerulean from a cobalt and says so when someone needs a second opinion? I can't answer that for anyone else. I can only keep trying to answer it for myself. Every day, and the small choices that add up to something, or don't. The house is still mine. Carolyn is here. Sophie's research station is still operational by the maple tree, and Gerald the armadillo still attends important events. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's the whole thing, actually. The whole point I missed for years while I was busy worrying about what was slipping away. You don't build a life by holding on to the wrong things. You build it by knowing, clearly and without flinching, what's actually worth keeping.